is the ultimate photographic memorial on the restoration of Nauvoo and the rebuilding of the Nauvoo Temple. There is no finer commemorative book available to celebrate these miraculous events that were prophesied by Brigham Young on January 2nd, 1846, and then fulfilled with the Nauvoo Temple's building and dedication. With no expense spared, this photographic masterpiece, along with many fascinating little-known written accounts, bring this never-forgotten era to life. You will love the book Nauvoo Restored. As a wonderful companion to this beautifully filmed video, visit Nauvoo. You can preserve the memory of this historic time and place for generations to come. It's now available in a high-quality hardcover binding and also in a rich leather-bound slip-covered commemorative collector's edition through Living Scriptures, Latter-day Harvest Bookstore, and through finer LDS bookstores. To order your book today, call Living Scriptures at 1-800-574-0050 or visit our website at www.livingscriptures.com.
Living Scriptures proudly presents its latest video series, the docudrama of the Restoration. Relive church history as never before, as this 12-tape video series takes you on a spellbinding journey through the rich heritage of the LDS Church. From the birth of Joseph Smith Jr. to the establishment of the saints in the Salt Lake Valley, you'll be thrilled with this unique approach to church history. Extensive research, rarely published stories, and little-known facts woven together by famed authors Blaine Jorgensen and Orson Scott Card will keep you captivated from start to finish. Over $2 million in production costs, along with live interviews, stunning on-site cinematography, and dramatized reenactments, make this the finest church history series ever. Contact Living Scriptures to make these inspiring videos part of your family values library today.
She had bursitis. She was a butterfly, and she got bursitis and back to the fridge. She was getting injections.
Nauvoo is indelibly impressed in the heart and memory of every Latter-day Saint. Generations have longed to know about and envision the streets and community of Nauvoo, the beautiful. But most of all, to hear the voice of the prophet Joseph Smith, whose vision created this place of wonder from a swampy wilderness. That never-forgotten longing is now fulfilled with the rebuilding of the Nauvoo Temple as a memorial to those who sacrificed everything to lay the foundation of the gospel restoration. It also fulfills a prophecy that this temple would once again bless the lives of those who have carried the faith and hope for this day. Nauvoo, the city of Joseph, commerce, Venus, the place before the rapids, an uninhabitable swamp. Each of these titles have been used to describe this area along the banks of the Mississippi as it grew and changed from the early 1800s through the present day. The original inhabitants of this area were the Sac and Fox Indians. They called their home Quashquima, or the head of the rapids. History remembers two of their chiefs, Black Hawk and Keokuk. Black Hawk, the namesake of the last wars between the Indians and the early settlers in Illinois, and Keokuk, now an Iowa community just 12 miles south of Nauvoo, where he is buried and honored with a statue overlooking the Mississippi. Though various accounts abound, the first legally recorded purchase of land from the Sac and Fox Indians was to Captain James White in 1824. He settled there in 1829. His initial small log house would later become the first residence of Joseph and Emma Smith. Over the next few years, along with Captain White, a handful of settlers would try their hand at taming this area. It was at this time George Y. Cutler established the first post office in Hancock County, and this small settlement at the bend in the river became known as Venus. A few years later, the name was changed to a more businesslike Commerce. Other settlers arrived, most notably Hiram Kimball, Daniel Wells, and Isaac Gallant, each purchasing significant amounts of land prior to the arrival of the Mormon saints. The history of Nauvoo for the early saints is one of faith, dedication, perseverance, sorrow, and great joy. Though the saints were in extreme poverty and their leader Joseph Smith incarcerated illegally in Liberty Jail in Missouri, they sought a place of peace and refuge after being driven from Missouri and Ohio by mobs. At the time, Israel Barlow, an early convert to the church, found this place known as Commerce, which was for sale. At the prophet's direction, the saints initially purchased the property, which included 3 parcels of land, including 18,000 acres of the Gallant purchase and 135 acres of the White purchase, which was located on both sides of the river in Iowa and Illinois. They later purchased land from Hiram Kimball and Daniel H. Wells. Commerce was located on a low-lying bend on the Mississippi River. It was a swampy, unhealthy place, and many of the weakened exiled saints succumbed to malaria. The children's mortality rate was well over 50%. However, over the next couple of years, the saints worked diligently to drain the swamps, digging ditches that drained into the Mississippi, thus rendering the land more inhabitable. Some of these canals and ditch work are still visible today. Draining stagnant swampy areas greatly improved health and soil conditions. But perhaps the greatest advance that came during that time was the brilliance and marketing genius of Dr. John Sappington of Arrow Rock, Missouri, and his anti-fever pills. Dr. Sappington used this pill maker to make quinine pills derived from the cinchona tree from South America. Progressive herbal doctors in Nauvoo, such as Calvin Pendleton, adopted this quinine miracle, which had been violently opposed by many medical men of that time, and malaria was quickly controlled and cured in Nauvoo. This once swampy area was soon beginning to grow and flourish. Joseph Smith renamed the area Nauvoo, which in Hebrew meant beautiful and peaceful. After all that the saints had suffered, the vision of a peaceful and beautiful place was a powerful image of hope for this persecuted people. A place to rest and to build a temple to their God. In just 7 years, the growth and development of Nauvoo was unequaled as it grew to rival Chicago as the largest city in Illinois. Nauvoo had lumber mills, grist mills, tanneries, potteries, bakeries, foundries, a slaughterhouse, comb factory, match factory, and dozens of shops and stores. The saints were encouraged to plant fruit trees around their homes, not only for food, but to beautify the area. Nauvoo was rich culturally as well, with an offering of plays, lectures, concerts, dances, banquets, and art exhibits. Unlike most religions of the day, the early saints were encouraged in the arts. A common schooling system was also organized, including a few university courses. The saints met in private homes and public buildings wherever space was available. Nauvoo continued to grow and flourish until the deaths of the prophet Joseph and his brother Hiram Smith at Carthage Jail, June 27, 1844. Though the saints remained until 1846, determined to complete the temple, persecution intensified until they were once again driven from their homes. This time, the saints headed to the Rocky Mountains, where they might live and worship the Lord in peace. Nauvoo today is the second most visited LDS church historical site next to Temple Square. the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and the Community of Christ work together to provide visitors to Nauvoo with a unique glimpse into the past and to preserve the peace and beauty of the area. In 1939, Bryant Hinckley, father of LDS President Gordon B. Hinckley, held a meeting in Nauvoo and quoted Brigham Young's prophetic words that Nauvoo would be restored. Many have been drawn to fulfilling this vision, reestablishing homes and businesses of the former era. Visitors to Nauvoo today will experience the hard work and dedication of both early saints and their modern-day counterparts, both LDS and non-LDS, who are working to establish businesses and infrastructure that will serve the needs of this growing community. A good place to begin your visit to Nauvoo is at the Nauvoo Visitor Center. Here you can obtain free tickets for an evening show in the Cultural Hall or begin a guided carriage ride tour through Nauvoo. At the Visitor Center, you'll also find informative displays, films, and a 15 by 15 foot map depicting Nauvoo as it was in 1846. You'll be able to get your bearings as you set out to experience over 24 restored homes, shops, and religious buildings. As you leave the Visitor Center, you'll enter the Monument to Women Memorial Garden. This beautiful and peaceful garden displays 13 life-size statues, each depicting a role that women play in the home and in society. Dedicated in 1978, this garden is a lasting tribute to faithful women of the past, present, and future. Perhaps the best known of the original brick structures in Nauvoo is the home of Heber C. Kimball. After 12 years of marriage, this was the first adequate home that Heber and Valade owned. This federal-style home is beautifully scaled architecturally. The original balcony inscription stone still carries Heber's initials, HCK. The original two-story structure was erected in 1845. Unfortunately, they lived in it just 4 months before they were forced to leave Nauvoo. It was another 6 years before they acquired another adequate home. The 1.5-story addition was added after the Kimballs left. The Heber C. Kimball home was the first LDS Nauvoo structure to be restored. In the 1950s, Dr. J. Leroy Kimball, a descendant of Heber C. Kimball, purchased the home and began the work of restoration and refurnishing. Dr. Kimball was a visionary, bringing much energy and gathering resources and support to restore Old Nauvoo. He was instrumental in establishing Nauvoo Restoration Incorporated, or NRI, a nonprofit foundation dedicated to physically restoring Nauvoo and preserving the history of the people and the church of that time. Begun in July 1962 by Dr. J. Leroy Kimball, the NRI is now sponsored by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and works in cooperation with the Illinois State Historical Society and the National Park Service. Sites have been located through research and archaeology. Some of the original buildings survived. By the year 2000, NRI had restored or developed more than 30 sites and properties in the historic village for tourists and visitors.
Wish I had it on tape. I was a double play at the end. Did you see Steve? That was Steve. I know. Yeah, that's fine. She's a mediator.
James Ivins began building the 3 buildings on the west side of Main between Munson and Kimball Streets in April of 1842. The first structure was used as a store until 1845 when the church moved the printing office there. It is a beautiful brick 2-story building with double doors on the back 2nd story for lifting up supplies to the press. It contained a stereotype foundry, typesetting oven, press room, bookbindery, and retail bookstore on the main floor. The printing office was the church's chief communication center for members living in North America. The bi-monthly Times and Seasons and the Weekly Wasp are also printed here. When John Taylor became the editor of the Wasp, he renamed it the Nauvoo Neighbor, a more peaceable name with less combative editorials. Many things, including books, were also printed here. Books were typically sold without covers, so the purchaser could pick out the color and quality of the cover. The structure adjacent to the printing office was the home of John Taylor, newspaper editor and future prophet. He recorded the purchase expressing, "My heart is not set upon property, but the things of God. I care not so much about the good things of this life as I do about the fellowship of my brethren, and to fulfilling the word the Lord has called me to do." Moved into my house May 10, 1845. He left 9 months later, on February 16, 1846. The post office was located in the third structure adjacent to John Taylor's home. It has been restored to reflect the look and feel of the 1840s. Often, to save on postage, letters were handwritten on one page with the writing going many different directions, complicating the reading process but saving on paper and postage. Jonathan Browning was a blacksmith and gifted gunmaker. He and many others, including Ezra T. Benson and Sarah Cleveland, emigrated from Quincy to Nauvoo after joining the church. Jonathan purchased the house and property from the Bird family in Nauvoo. The Birds were quiet farming people who didn't like the noise and excitement of living on Main Street or nearby the Prophet, who had people in and out all the time at all hours. The Brownings appreciated the location, which was good for business. Jonathan experimented making rifles of different lengths, as the rule of the day was, the longer the rifle, the straighter the shot. He began rifling the inside of the gun barrel, which improved the accuracy of the gun. He also developed a simple method to slide bullets into the gun, making a repeating rifle. He shared his gifts with all. He volunteered to go west with the first company of wagons, but was asked to remain to help prepare all on their way. His son, John Moses Browning, became the world-famous revolutionary gun inventor, obtaining the most patents on guns of any man. His patents are still in use today. This small 16 by 16 foot reconstructed two-story building was the home and shoe factory of the Reiser family. The Reisers came to Nauvoo as newlyweds investigating the church. They were baptized in the winter in the half-frozen Mississippi River. They had 6 employees and made shoes for every sized foot, charging from 50 cents for a small child's shoe to $5 for a pair of boots. Shoes were not made for a right and left foot, but had square-toed boxes so the shoes could be rotated each day to wear the shoes evenly on the sole. Like the Reiser family, the Stoddard family lived in and operated a business out of their home. Located on the west side of Main Street between Munson and Kimball Streets, the Stoddard home has been restored to its earlier charm. It contains 2 bedrooms upstairs and a sitting room and shop downstairs. It is decorated with the paint colors of the period, ochre, yellow, and the famous Nauvoo blue teal on the walls and trim. Because tin by itself is too soft to be useful, the tin pieces were really iron that was coated with tin for rust resistance. A sheet of tin was laid out and a pattern traced with an awl. Large shears cut out the pattern. A handbrake folds the tin down. It is engaged in a seamer and flanged together. A wire is crimped and rolled into the top to make it strong and safe from sharp edges. Fluting gives it strength also. A domed top could be shaped on the log that was hollowed into various sized cup-like shapes. Lucius and Lucy Snow Scoville owned and operated this bakery on Old Nauvoo's Main Street, a small brick structure that probably had an upstairs for living quarters. A bustle oven, named for its resemblance to a woman's large bustle skirt, was built outside of the home so that the home did not become overheated, especially in the long hot summer months. Known for their baked goods, jellies, candy, and crackers, the Scovilles also made wedding cakes and operated a catering service. In addition to running the bakery with his wife, Lucius was also a contractor who worked on the cultural hall and other buildings. They were dedicated to the Lord and served valiantly. The story is told. When their son died at age 14, they deeply desired a stone marker for his grave but had no money for such a luxury. Determined to obtain a headstone, Lucius offered to trade 4 bushels of wheat for a marker. He approached Charles Lambert at his home one evening to ask for the favor. Charles was a stonemason working on the Nauvoo temple. He and his wife rejoiced at the offer of food, as they and their children were starving and had petitioned the Lord only minutes before for help. Today, the Scoville Bakery is once again a favorite spot among visitors. The Cultural and Masonic Hall is a beautiful, stately 3-story building which was the heart of Nauvoo's social life. The hall housed church and business meetings, Masonic lodge meetings, funerals, court sessions, the militia headquarters, and police offices. Dances, symphonies, and plays were also held here. Brigham Young encouraged participation and attendance, saying this type of cultural interaction brought civility to the city. Visitors today can enjoy an evening musical performance in the Cultural Hall celebrating Nauvoo's early years. These fun-filled programs are presented by the LDS missionaries, who staff and offer guided tours of the many sites of Old Nauvoo. The Sarah Granger Kimball home is one of the few homes dating back to before the Saints' arrival in Commerce. Sarah, intelligent and outgoing, had attended the School of the Prophets in Kirtland. She married Hiram Kimball, who was not a church member at the time. Because of his wife's great love and faith and the warm friendship he developed with the prophet Joseph Smith, Hiram donated an entire city block to the Temple Fund. Later, he joined the church and came west. Visitors to the Lands and Records Office will be assisted in documenting where their ancestors lived, farmed, and owned land in and around Nauvoo. Desks and books are available for individuals' research. Assistance is available and copies made for a nominal fee. The Webb Blacksmith Shop is on the north side of Parley Street between Granger and Bain Streets. It was one of the great hubs of activity in Nauvoo, especially the fall of 1845 to the summer of 1846. 5 Webb brothers moved to Nauvoo in 1841-42 and were involved in this blacksmith and wagon shop. It has been rebuilt again with hearth, forge, anvils, and equipment that was used at the time. It contains both a blacksmith and wagon maker, or wainwright as they were called. The wagon inside the Nauvoo wainwright shop was drawn by oxen and has no seat. Oxen walked slowly and were led along rather than driven like a team of horses. This wagon could hold 2,000 pounds of supplies and equipment. Oxen were shoed like a horse for the journey across the plains. Oxen had advantages over horses for the journey across the plains. They were cheap to buy, were stronger than horses, could eat whatever grasses were along the trail, needed less water than horses, and were less likely to be stolen by Indians. As the Saints became organized after leaving Nauvoo, wainwrights and blacksmith shops were set up every 200 miles to repair broken parts on wagons and keep animals in condition to pull their burdens. The nail used to hold the shoe to the horse or ox had a hash mark on one side, thus allowing the blacksmith to feel which side to hammer through the shoe into the hoof so it would flay outward, and thus he would never make a mistake and lame the animal. These nails are bent into rings called prairie diamonds and given to guests visiting the blacksmith shop. The 70s Hall is located on the Trail of Hope. It is a beautiful reconstructed two-story building with glazed fanlight over the door and an inscription stone on the front facade reading, Priesthood. It was built as a meeting place and instructional hall for Nauvoo's 15 quorums of 70s. These quorums were called specifically to do missionary work. This was the MTC of Nauvoo. The quorums worked together to build this hall in 1844. Early on, it was blown down by a tornado. Discouraged, the project stopped. Brigham Young desired to see it built and told them to make it 4 bricks thick and it would stand. They pursued the work again as instructed to build a stately and beautiful brick 2-story building. The bottom floor was used for classes, lectures, and worship. The second floor housed the town library and museum of artifacts brought back by missionaries. Visitors today can enjoy a museum library upstairs and ancestral records of missionaries who left during the Nauvoo era. During the exodus from Nauvoo, most saints traveled this street known then as Parley Street. In wagons lining up to the Mississippi River, they were ferried across on river barges. The street has since been called the Trail of Hope, expressing the core belief of those who became pioneers on their trek west. At the end of the Trail of Hope along the banks of the Mississippi stands a memorial to those who died while in Nauvoo. Each of their names are inscribed inside the memorial. Others, who have no records, are also memorialized, and a U.S. flag also pays tribute to the saints. Wilford Woodruff, desirous to provide a comfortable home for his family during his lengthy absence while proselyting abroad, began construction on this home in 1841. By mid-1844, the Woodruffs moved into their beautiful Federal-style home. Their stay was short, however, as persecution increased. The Woodruffs were forced to abandon their new home and join the trek west in 1846. The Woodruff House was the first building in Nauvoo to have an authentic and documented architectural restoration. It contains an arched window in the attic space on the home's side elevation, which is typical of the Federal-style construction of New England. Called on a mission to England, Brigham Young left his family in an abandoned army barracks across the river from Nauvoo. The family suffered want and cold without him, but despite the sacrifice, his wife Mary Ann wrote of the experience as a blessing of learning to depend on the Lord, a great blessing indeed. Before his return, Mary Ann had obtained property on the flats with an unfinished cabin. Though the ground was so wet it wouldn't take a plow, Brigham and Mary Ann were determined to create a home and farm for their family. Eventually, they built a small 2-story brick home with a kitchen, sitting room downstairs, and 2 small bedrooms upstairs. On becoming the leader of the church, he put 2 wings on this little brick home, a bedroom and a meeting room with a large rectangular table that could seat 12. The spirit in the room is one of inspiration, nobility, and grandeur. Most of the surviving or partially surviving structures in Nauvoo were built from brick. Many of the British converts brought not only their strong testimonies to Nauvoo, but their brick-making and masonry skills as well. Constructing homes with brick was common as the community grew because adequate lumber was hard to obtain, but good clay soil was plentiful and of good quality. With a replica of an 1840s kiln, the brick-making process is demonstrated at the Brickyard, where visitors can obtain souvenir bricks fired with the same clay and materials that were originally used to build the houses and businesses of Nauvoo. Windsor P. and Sylvia Sessions Lyon originally opened their drug and variety store in a log cabin on this block. It was replaced by the successful Lyons couple with a large brick store and adjoining home in 1843. A bottle with red and blue dyed water, symbolizing a druggist, sat in the window. It was stocked with herbs, medicines, fabrics, soaps, and just about everything found in a frontier store. It was a social gathering spot, as well as a place for the brethren to meet as they determine the course of the saints. Of the 2,500 homes in Nauvoo, over half of them were log. This rebuilt home of Dr. Calvin Crane Pendleton and his wife Sally Ann Seavey is typical of the early log homes in Nauvoo, with a lean-to room built on the back functioning as a small classroom. Dr. Pendleton was from Maine, a well-educated and well-trained medical doctor. He regarded his healing ability a gift and refused to be paid for his services. He was a good friend to Jonathan Browning and learned the skill of a blacksmith and gun making from him to earn an income. He saw a need to educate the children in Nauvoo and began a school to share his own fine education. His wife Sally helped teach the children also. They taught reading, writing, arithmetic, and penmanship. In 1839, Joseph Bates and Mary Beeman Noble arrived in the Nauvoo area. They built this lovely brick house in 1843, along with a stable, carriage house, and other outbuildings. In the spring of 1846, they determined to leave but had not sold their home. Brigham Young bought the home specifically for Lucy Mack to have property of her own, since she didn't feel strong enough to exodus with the Saints immediately, but determined to join them when their new city was established. Patty Sessions, a midwife of great renown, lived in a log cabin similar to this reconstruction, reminiscent of the type of log cabins in early Nauvoo. Here, Patty planted a large garden and used the herbs she harvested in her work as a midwife. The brick home of Vincent Knight is another beautifully restored original Nauvoo structure. Vincent left Missouri with the Saints and came to Quincy in 1839. He was appointed a church agent, authorized to purchase thousands of acres in Illinois and Iowa Territory in behalf of the church. The Ashby Snow duplex has an interesting history. Erastus Snow, along with some of the brethren, was called to go to Salem, Massachusetts to find a treasure. The treasure that they sought was money to pay the mounting church debt. This revelation was given to the brethren who went to Salem. I, the Lord your God, am not displeased with your coming this journey, notwithstanding your follies. I have much treasure in this city for you, for the benefit of Zion, and many people in this city, whom I will gather out in due time for the benefit of Zion, through your instrumentality. One of the families converted to the church was the Ashbys, who became lifelong friends of the Snows. The Ashbys and Snows enjoyed their time in Nauvoo, living side by side, and their families eventually even intermarried. This home is a restoration of the original Simeon Dunn home. Simeon wrote, "On May 18, 1846, I left Nauvoo to follow in the wake and share in all the toils and suffering of the saints." The Nauvoo Cemetery is a most beautiful place, especially at sunset through the trees. Many were buried here who do not have a marker or record. Those who do are listed in the building there. Janetta Richards was the first soul confirmed with the Holy Ghost in England. When Willard Richards met Janetta, he was very impressed and remarked to her, "I think Richards is a good name, don't you, Janetta?" She concurred, "And I never should like to change it." They were sweethearts throughout their marriage and had 3 children. Janetta was the first woman of this dispensation to be buried in her temple clothes. When she passed away, their son, little Heber John, begged, "Pa, will you bury Ma in the garden? If you do, I can bear it. If you do not, I cannot bear it." Willard buried her in the garden. In 1958, the present memorial marker in Nauvoo was placed by the Richards family. The marker is near the Wilford Woodruff home on the side of the road. The William Weeks home is an original building. It is a simple single-story brick structure that doesn't reveal the true talent that William contributed to Nauvoo. As a convert, he came to Nauvoo and Joseph Smith appointed him as the temple architect. He also designed the Nauvoo House, the Masonic Temple, and the Arsenal. He handled the day-to-day problems in the Nauvoo Temple's construction. But Joseph Smith had seen the temple in vision, so it was William's job to commit to drawing an architectural design as to what the prophet described. One particularly unique design detail that concerned him was the temple's circular window layout given by Joseph, because it fit no known standard. The arches were probably a more familiar design, as he used it in his own home's doorway. But Joseph convinced him that the circle effect would have a splendid appearance and the effect would be remarkably grand. His contribution to this amazing structure would have lived on in history even if the temple hadn't been rebuilt. William became estranged with Brigham Young and in 1857 moved his family from Utah to Southern California. The original Nauvoo temple plans remained in his possession. He gave them to his daughter Caroline, who bequeathed them to her son Leslie M. Griffin. In 1948, these 2 missionaries, Elder Frank F. Gifford and Vern C. Thacker, living and tracting in the hot, dusty desert town of Boron, California, chanced to find Mr. Griffin. He and his family felt strongly that these inspired plans should be returned to the church in Salt Lake City. The returning missionary, Elder Vern C. Thacker, driving his own car home, was entrusted to bring these priceless plans back to Salt Lake City Church headquarters. These wonderfully preserved drawings, donated by Leslie Griffin and his family, provided much greater accuracy for the rebuilding of the Nauvoo Temple. Interestingly, some of his descendants are now members of the church. The restoration of the area known as Old Nauvoo began in 1918 with the return of members of the reorganized Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, now known as the Community of Christ. Caretakers for the Mansion House and other Joseph Smith properties were appointed at that time. Beginning at the Joseph Smith Historic Center, guests will find on display original paintings by Joseph's son, David Hiram, as well as many interesting artifacts, including an original sunstone and moonstone from the Nauvoo Temple. Guided walking tours are offered by friendly and knowledgeable hosts. Any trip to Old Nauvoo would be incomplete without a tour of the sites, which include the Smith Cabin, Homestead, and Mansion House, which are the only original structures that Joseph Smith lived and worked in. Joseph said on May 10, 1839, "I arrived with my family at the White Purchase and took up my residence in a small log house on the bank of the river, about 1 mile south of Commerce City, hoping that I and my friends may here find a resting place for a little season at least." Joseph moved his family into the homestead that consisted of a block and frame home with a very small log cabin in back, a summer kitchen, where his mother Lucy and father Joseph Smith Sr. lived. Joseph Smith Sr. died from exhaustion just a few months after relocating to Commerce. Joseph's immediate family, consisting of himself, Emma, Julia, Joseph III, and Frederick, took up residence in the block log and frame home immediately in front of the cabin on the banks of the Mississippi. On January 19, 1841, Joseph received revelation to build a place where traveler and saint could contemplate the glory of Zion. Joseph soon donated the land, and architects William Weeks and Lucian Woodworth made plans for an L-shaped hotel, much like the Mansion House became. Construction began in 1841 and halted in 1844. In the 1870s, Louis Bideman recreated a smaller riverside mansion, or Bideman House, from the original materials. Louis and Emma lived there until their deaths. Bishop E.L. Kelly, trustee for the reorganized Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, purchased the house and surrounding acreage on October 13, 1909. It can be rented today as a hostel with sleeping arrangements and also a dining hall and a kitchen for a group. The Mansion House is a 2-story frame house and the second home of the Joseph Smith family. Construction began in 1842. Joseph moved his family in August of 1843. Later, a wing was added to the east side of the main structure for a total of 22 rooms. The mansion, being large and convenient, said the prophet, renders travelers more comfortable than any other place on the upper Mississippi. Joseph welcomed paid guests to the Mansion House until January 1844, when the hotel portion was leased to Ebenezer Robinson, and Joseph and his family maintained 6 rooms. Joseph and Hiram's bodies were brought here, where thousands filed by and paid their respects. Emma lived here until 1871, when she moved into the Nauvoo house, where she died in 1879. Emma cared for Joseph's mother, Lucy Mack, in the Mansion House until she passed away. As a result of archaeological diggings, this foundation of Joseph Smith's stable was uncovered. It served guests and visitors to the Mansion House and was a 3-story barn with the animals and stalls in the bottom, the carriages and wagons wheeled in on the main floor, and the feed on the top floor. It was a very well-planned and useful barn. The RLDS Church undertook reconstruction of the red brick store in the late 1970s and began tours in 1980. Originally opened on January 5, 1842, the store was owned and operated by Emma and Joseph Smith. Church members came to pay their tithing at Bishop Newell K. Whitney's office in the back of the building on the first floor. His desk is on display in that room. The store was often the center for various religious, social, and civic meetings, which were held on the second floor. The Nauvoo Female Relief Society was organized here and met regularly under the direction of their elected president, Emma Smith. Today, various goods typical of the 1840s are available for purchase. Located on the homestead property, a peaceful setting on the banks of the Mississippi River, the Smith family cemetery serves as the final resting place for several of the early Smith family members. As many families did at this time, Joseph and Emma set aside part of their land to bury family and friends. During their time in Nauvoo, the Smith family suffered many losses, including Joseph's parents and brothers Don Carlos and Samuel Smith. Joseph and Hiram were reburied here after being secretly buried in the basement of the Nauvoo house, and then moved to under the little spring shed on the homestead property. The exact location of the martyrs' graves was lost when Emma died in 1879. However, after much digging and searching, members of the RLDS Church held a day of fasting and prayer to receive guidance. Within a few hours, the bodies were found, exhumed, and reburied on January 20th, 1928, alongside Emma, where they still rest to this day. The graves of Joseph and Hiram were marked for the first time on this special occasion. Carthage Jail is infamously known as the place of martyrdom of the prophet Joseph and his brother Hiram. After the inflammatory newspaper, the Nauvoo Expositor, was destroyed by order of the city council, the enemies of Joseph Smith determined to incarcerate him outside of Nauvoo. In Carthage, Illinois, Hancock County's county seat, many hoped Joseph could be tried and convicted outside the jurisdiction of Nauvoo and the protection of the Nauvoo Legion. Here, they could assassinate him and end what they considered the scourge of Mormonism. On the morning of June 24, 1844, Joseph and Hiram, accompanied by many of the brethren, voluntarily left for Carthage to be interviewed by Governor Ford under his expressed guaranteed protection. Feeling sorrow, heaviness, and foreboding, they bid their loved ones goodbye and took in their last view of Nauvoo the Beautiful and the magnificent temple under construction. Carthage was approximately 22 miles by road to the southeast, and the Carthage jail was located near the courthouse on the outskirts of the town at that time. Prisoners were actually housed upstairs, and the jailer lived downstairs. But instead of placing Joseph, Hiram, and their friends in the inner jail or prison, they were not considered a threat and were housed in this room upstairs rather than the steel-barred jail. At approximately 5:15 p.m. on June 27, 1844, the mob stormed the stairs of the jail, firing balls through this door. Hiram was hit immediately and was mortally wounded. Joseph cradled him tenderly, and then, seeing that his presence endangered his friends, ran to the window and called out. He was wounded and fell through the window with the impact of bullets fired from the room. His body lay next to the well underneath the window, where the mob savagely fired additional balls into his body. The cowardly mob soon fled, leaving the prophet and his brother Hiram dead. John Taylor lay upstairs seriously wounded underneath the bed where he had crawled for protection. Miraculously, Willard Richards was unharmed by the flurry, as was previously prophesied by his dear friend Joseph. The watch of John Taylor deflected one ball, saving his life and stopping its hands at the moment this horrible act was committed. This tragic assassination didn't destroy the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints as the mobbers had hoped, nor did his death eliminate Joseph Smith's influence as the prophet of the Restoration. Today, hundreds of thousands reverently visit this place and remember the ultimate sacrifice of their beloved prophet, and the great city he built and the religion he organized under God's direction. A beautiful statue of Joseph and Hiram was placed outside the jail, remembering, in life they were not divided, and in death they were not separated. On January 19, 1841, Joseph Smith recorded a revelation from the Lord commanding the saints to build a house to my name. The site chosen for the temple was a predominant point overlooking the Mississippi River. It was a huge structure for the time and could be seen for miles by travelers on land, the river, and across the Mississippi from Iowa. The temple stood as the crowning edifice of the new community, reflecting the faith and commitment of those who accepted the restored gospel and gathered to Nauvoo. Stone was cut from nearby quarries on the bank of the Mississippi River. The large 4 to 6 foot thick stones, weighing up to 2 tons each, were rough cut at the quarries, hauled to the temple lot, and then dressed and polished. On April 6, 1841, with great celebration, the cornerstones were laid on this site and building commenced on the Nauvoo Temple. The martyrdom of Joseph and Hiram temporarily slowed down construction in June 1844. However, Brigham Young was determined to continue the work on the temple. The saints again committed themselves to completing this sacred building. By March 1845, Brigham Young expressed an urgency for the saints to hasten their work on the temple. He promised the saints that if they worked on the temple, they would be greatly blessed, that the Lord would make it up to them when their crops were harvested. On the following day, 105 extra workers showed up to labor on the temple. The exterior of the temple was finished with the placement of the capstone on May 24, 1845, 11 months after the martyrdom of Joseph Smith. Though mob persecution increased, the saints continued to work on the interior of the temple. On December 10, 1845, the first endowment ordinances were administered in the temple. Thousands received these sacred ordinances during the winter of 1845 through 46, prior to being driven from their homes and their beautiful temple. On the 2nd of January, 1846, in the celestial room of the Nauvoo Temple, Brigham Young uttered these prophetic words. "We can't stay in this temple but a little while. We have got to build another house. It will be a larger house than this, and a more glorious one. And we shall build a great many houses. We shall come back here and build houses all over the continent of North America." With the majority of the saints beginning their exodus west, many remained to finish the temple, knowing well they too would soon be driven from Nauvoo. On the 30th of April, 1846, Elder Wilford Woodruff, Elder Orson Hyde, and 20 others held a private dedication of the Nauvoo Temple. A private service was held for fear of mob interference. On the following morning, May 1st, 1846, a public dedication was held with 3,000 saints in attendance. However, by September 1846, the once thriving Nauvoo was now near deserted and overrun with mobs. The temple had been desecrated and vandalized. On November 10, 1848, an arsonist's fire nearly destroyed the temple. What structure remained was leveled by a tornado in May 1850. Subsequently, the temple stones were removed and used for other buildings. Ironically, some of these original temple stones were used to construct this jail, which can still be seen at the base of the Nauvoo City Water Tower in the alleyway behind the State Bank of Nauvoo. The Latter-day Saints, however, never forgot Nauvoo or their temple. Finally, the temple site was reacquired in 1937 by Wilford Wood for the LDS Church. As negotiations progressed, church leaders instructed him not to offer more than $1,000 for the temple property. Brother Wood recorded, "An impression came to me, and I said, 'Are you going to try to make us pay an exorbitant price for the blood of a martyred prophet when you know this property rightfully belongs to the Mormon people?' I felt the spirit of the prophet Joseph in that room. Mr. Anton, the banker, said, 'We will sell the lot for $900. I grasped his hand, then the hand of the cashier of the bank, and the agreement was made and signed. Prophecies uttered by Brigham Young, B.H. Roberts, Bryant Hinckley, and others, that the saints would return and rebuild, were realized on October 24, 1999, as the cornerstones were reset and construction commenced. Now this majestic temple once again overlooks Nauvoo. June 27, 2002 is a significant and holy day to every Latter-day Saint, as the day of Joseph Smith's martyrdom and the day and year of the Nauvoo Temple's dedication. It is a symbolic statement that the work and vision the prophet Joseph Smith established is still seen not only in these beautifully restored structures in Nauvoo, but in the lives of millions worldwide who have believed and accepted Joseph's message of the restored gospel of Jesus Christ. Nauvoo is the poetic story of triumph, then tragedy, and then final triumph, as old Nauvoo rises again, being restored to its former glory. The temple stands once again, beautifully and prominently, as a lasting tribute to the faith and sacrifice of the Latter-day Saints. In staging the many hours of helicopter flights necessary to film the aerial footage of this video, Mr. Robert J. Ziegler was very kind and generous to provide his private airport just outside of Nauvoo for refueling and reloading film. This made it possible to film much more than could have been done flying from Keokuk. Perhaps the most interesting coincidence learned during the filming was that Mr. Ziegler's beautiful farm originally belonged to the prophet Joseph Smith.